I will never understand why people do things that make others angry. I went through life trying not to upset anyone, and it was probably too much for me to expect the same from others. I met my wife, Linda, when we were in high school. From the age of 16, we were exclusive and everyone else knew we got married just after Linda's 21st birthday. My lifelong friend Alan Hunter was my best man, Linda's sister, Marie, and 2 of her nieces were bridesmaids. If asked, I would say Linda was beautiful and everything I would want in a wife. We bought a nice house on a quiet street in a nice neighborhood. 2 years after we were married, Linda became pregnant with Nick, our son, and 18 months later, she gave birth to our daughter Gail. Since we only wanted 2 children, I had a vasectomy after Gail was born. By the way, my name is Don Simmons, and I work as a production manager for a company that may specialize lifting machines and cranes. I make good money. So being a stay-at-home mom was never a problem for Linda. It was until a few years later when a problem arose. Linda was still a very attractive woman. Her size, 3 breasts, and cute ass still turned me on. Too bad it did the same for someone else. I thought life was perfect, at least as perfect as it could be. The kids were well behaved, and we enjoyed a good social life. Once a month, my parents took the kids out so Linda and I could have a date night. We usually had dinner and then went to a club for a few hours. And when we got home, we always made love. My so-called perfect life came crashing down on a Wednesday afternoon. I had been to the dentist and decided to go home right afterward. There was a law at work, so I wouldn't be missed during the day. I entered the house and froze in place. The noise I heard upstairs suggested that Linda was either having fun with a toy or she had a man in there. I quietly crept upstairs deciding that if she was alone, it was silly to miss out on afternoon sex. Linda seemed to have the same idea. I peeked out our bedroom door and saw my so-called friend Alan Carter having a doggy style. Out of my mind, I stormed into the room. "Bastard," I yelled. I threw a punch that hit Alan in the jaw. He cried out in pain and fell off the bed. Linda screamed and frantically covered herself. "Dawn, what the hell are you doing home?" she asked dumbly. "I live here in case you forgot," I replied, returning my attention to the asshole. Grabbing him by the hair, I pulled him towards me and punched him several times in the face and stomach, my parting blow being a kick to the balls. "Get out of my house, you bastard!" Barely wearing his clothes, I got him to the door and threw him out the doorstep before storming back upstairs. "How long ago?" I shouted to Linda. She chickened out and said nothing. "How long have you been sleeping with that asshole?" I asked again. Linda stared at me with tears in her eyes. "About 2 months. I didn't mean for it to happen, Dawn. It just happened." "Yeah. That's right. Get yourself cleaned up and get this place cleaned up before the kids come home. I'm going out for a bit, and I'll be home at the usual time." I snickered before walking down the stairs and out of the house. I parked my car in the local parking lot and went for a walk to think things over. Up until today, I was sure that Linda loved me as much as I loved her. I had no idea she was sleeping with my so-called best friend. Nothing had changed at home. There was nothing to make me suspicious. I decided I couldn't let it go unchallenged. Some mistakes I could forgive, but not this one. I decided not to say anything to Linda except that I needed time to think. She tried to apologize that night, but I ignored her and fell asleep on the couch. The next day I called work and took the rest of the week off. Thankfully, no one asked why. My lawyer tried to talk me out of filing for divorce, saying I wouldn't come out of it too well. I told him it was my business and to file for Linda as soon as he could. My next trip was a trip to the bank. I moved most of our savings out of Linda's reach. As far as I was concerned, she didn't deserve to receive money from me. When I got home, Linda tried to talk to me. I raised my hand to stop her. "I don't care about your pathetic excuses, Linda, leave me alone." Walking away, Linda cried. I locked myself in my home office so I couldn't see her. When the kids came home from school, I went down to see them, and they were both glad I was early today. Linda was on her cell phone while I chatted with the kids. Gail is 9, and I don't think she realizes what's going on. Nick, on the other hand, was watching me and Linda. And I could tell by the look on his face that he realized something was wrong. Seeing me watching her, Linda interrupted the call and came over to talk to the kids. There was never a good time to make an announcement like mine, but I decided to do it now. Told the kids that Mom and Dad no longer loved each other, assured them that I would still be there for them and would see them as often as I could. Linda had a look of shock on her face. I think if the kids hadn't been around, it would have ended in a scream. Nick sat quietly looking at the floor. Gail sat on my lap and cuddled up, crying heartily. I looked at Linda with a look that said, "This is all your fault." Linda turned and walked away into the kitchen. I could hear her crying quietly. Later that night, when the kids were already asleep, Linda tried to talk to me. "Please, Don, can we talk about this?" "No. We can't," I replied before heading to my home office. I slept in my office chair all night just to avoid listening to Linda's whining. When Linda took the kids to school the next morning, she said she was going to her parents' house, but I didn't care as I was going to look for a place to live. Fortunately, there was an apartment a mile or so away. I rented it and came home to start packing. When Linda returned from her parents', I had already packed almost all of my clothes. "So you're leaving?" "Yes," I said, "I'm leaving, and nothing you can say or do will change my mind." "Would it help if Alan talked to you and apologized?" "No. It wouldn't. In fact, you can tell that fucking snake to stay away from me. If I see him again, I'll probably finish the job I started the other day." Linda turned away and started crying. To hell with her tears, it was all her fault anyway. As I was loading things into the car, a man came up to the house and called out to Linda. "Mrs. Linda Simmons?" he asked. "Yes. I'm Linda Simmons. You have been served." He handed Linda an envelope and turned quietly, walking away. "Please, Don. Please don't do this to our family." "I didn't do this to our family, Linda. You did it." I got in my car and drove away, leaving Linda in tears the door. I filed for divorce citing adultery. Linda asked me to change the wording to irreconcilable differences. I refused to even consider that option. At least let people know who was in the wrong. Linda signed the papers, but the divorce was slow, very slow. The first weekend, I invited the kids over to visit. Nick asked if I would ever come home. "No, I'm sorry, son. But I'm not coming back," I replied, holding back tears. For the next few months, the kids stayed with me every other weekend and a few days during school vacations. The divorce became final, and Linda never got any of our savings. Although she had the last laugh, my lawyer warned me that I would not come out of this situation healthy. He should have said financially healthy. I ended up paying half of the mortgage and child support. I didn't mind the latter, but it pissed me off that I was paying Linda's spousal support. She would get alimony for 5 years or until she got married. One weekend, I found out from the kids that Alan had moved into the house, which didn't really surprise me. What pissed me off was that Linda told them as if they should call him Daddy. There's no way I'm going to tolerate that. On Sunday, I picked up the kids and asked Linda if I could talk to her. We went out into the garden so the children couldn't hear. Alan was sitting on the terrace smoking a cigar. The children said as if you were telling them they should call that snake Daddy. "Is that true?" "Yeah. I figured they need a father around. And since Alan's here and you're not, they can call him Daddy." "What do you mean they can? They're my kids, and I'm not gonna let them call that asshole Daddy." Alan stood up as if about to cause a scandal. "Sit down, asshole, unless you wanna get another good whipping." Linda stared at me, folding her arms in front of her. "I'm serious, Linda, you shouldn't let the kids call that creature Daddy. I'll settle for them calling him Uncle Alan, but no more. When they're old enough, they can call him any fucking name they want. Just to put it all in perspective, now that you and the bastard live here, I'm cutting my mortgage payments by 1/3, he can make up the difference." I walked away, leaving the pair of them in stunned silence. After that conversation, The relationship between Linda and I became so bad that I didn't go into the house picking up or dropping off the kids on weekends. Work went up, and I was promoted with a solid pay increase. I didn't tell Linda and the kids about it for fear she would demand more money from me. As it turned out, I needn't have worried. The next time I picked up the kids, Linda asked if she could talk to me. I reluctantly agreed, and we were back in the garden. "Don, I thought you should know this. Alan asked me to marry him." I didn't answer anything. Just shrugged my shoulders and walked away smiling. These knuckleheads had obviously forgotten that if Linda got married, my spousal benefits would stop. The Monday after their wedding, I canceled the direct transfer. When Linda asked where her money was that month, I said, "You got married, Linda," which relieved me of the obligation to make the monthly payment. I hung up the phone, smiling as I did so. Before I could hang up, I heard Linda mutter the word shit. In a way, I was pissed because I was still paying a third of the mortgage. Even though I'd agreed to it so the kids would have a roof over their heads. Thanks to a pay raise and the money I saved by not paying Linda, I took out a mortgage and bought myself a house. The kids loved the house, even though it required a lot of work. Nick was 14 and understood exactly why Linda and I were divorced. I think Gail knew too, but didn't talk about it. With the help of the kids, I sorted out the garden. The grass in the yard was so tall, I expected to find the camp of an uncharted tribe in it. The kids had their own rooms, and I let them pick their own colors within reason, of course. One day, Linda asked if I could take the kids the following weekend as well. Apparently, she and Alan needed some alone time. I politely declined as I had my own plans for the weekend. Actually, I didn't have any plans, but I wasn't going to help her. My new neighbors welcomed me happily, and my kids made friends with the two kids next door. The only single person on the street was a widow in her 60s. I didn't make acquaintances as children were more important to me, but that all changed when my neighbor, Nicola, introduced me to her sister Judy. Judy had never been married, which surprised me considering how beautiful she was. Judy was about 6'3", medium build with curves in all the right places. That's how I would describe her. After a few dates, I introduced Judy to my children. I don't know if Judy was nervous, but I'm sure she was. They all got along so well that by the end of the evening, we were acting like a normal family. Gail had a big crush on Judy, and several times she went to her for advice. I found out the reason for this a few weeks later when I took them home. Linda and Alan didn't get along. I guess marriage is different from friendly sex. Linda started drinking heavily at home while Alan spent most evenings out of the house drinking in pubs and bars. It got so bad that Gail called one evening and asked if I could come and help. Linda was drunk and in a bad way. I helped Gail get Linda upstairs. Gail undressed her mother and put her to bed. All this time, Alan was nowhere to be seen. The three of us had just sat down when there was a knock on the door. I opened it and saw two policemen. "What can I do for you officers?" "We're looking for Mrs. Carter." "I'm sorry. She's upstairs in bed. I doubt I'll be able to wake her up tonight. I'm her ex-husband. Is there anything I can do to help?" I spent a few minutes explaining my reasons for coming here, and the children confirmed my story, and the officers gave me the bad news. Mr. Alan Carter died tonight. He crashed his car into a tree. I'm afraid he died instantly. I assured the officers that I would stay and let my ex-wife know when she woke up in the morning. The children were quiet. But none of them cried when the officers told us about Alan. "This is going to destroy Mom," Nick stated, looking at Gail. She, in turn, nodded in agreement. I told them to go to bed and we deal with it in the morning. As much as I despised Alan for what he had done, I didn't want to tell Linda that he was dead. Sure, I didn't like them for what they had done, but I wasn't going to take any pleasure in it. The next morning, Linda staggered down the stairs. She looked like shit with a hangover. The booze had clearly taken its toll on her appearance. She stared at me and aggressively asked, "What the fuck are you doing here?" I explained that I came in last night when Gail called for help. "Well, as you can see, I'm fine. You can leave now." "Linda, you better sit down and shut up." I replied. Linda looked at me, then decided to sit down. Okay. What's this all about, Don? I don't have time for games. No games, Linda. While you were sleeping it off drunk last night, the police came by to see you. What do they want from me? I didn't do anything wrong. I'm sorry, Linda. They came by about Alan. The police are here to tell you that Alan was killed in a traffic accident last night. All we know is that he crashed his car into a tree and they suspect he was drunk. Linda sat staring at me for what seemed like an eternity. She put her head in her hands and burst into tears, and the children tried to comfort her, but it was no use. I stayed in case I was needed, but after about an hour, I apologized and left. As I said before, I despised Alan for what he and Linda had done to destroy our family, but I never wished him dead. Out of respect for him and for the sake of the children, I attended his funeral. Linda did not speak to me, but her parents thanked me for being there to support her. I'm here for the kids and for no other reason. From what I understand, Linda bought it all herself. Linda's parents looked shocked, then quietly turned and walked away. I stood with the kids while Linda was left alone at the grave. One evening, about a month after the funeral, I got a frantic phone call from Nick. Dad, please come over soon. Mom had gone crazy. She beat up Gail and is throwing things around like crazy. I said I was on my way, and I raced to my car, and then I raced to the house. On the way, I called the police and told them what Nick had told me. They said a few officers were on their way. I pulled up to the house a little before the police did. I ran inside, leaving the door open. The house looked like a war zone. Linda was drunk off her ass and throwing things around. You bastard. It's your fucking fault, she screamed at me as something flew past my head. Dodging anything that was thrown, I walked over to Gail lying on the floor. 2 police officers came in and immediately subdued Linda. She was still swearing and calling me every name under the sun and then lashed out at the officers, calling them some nasty names. As the officers took Linda outside to a waiting police van, the paramedics arrived and were treating Gail while I was talking to an officer. I looked back and saw Nick coming down the stairs with a bloody towel over his head. I'm sorry, Dad, I tried to stop Mom hitting Gail. She turned to me and hit me over the head with something heavy. That's when I called you. Don't worry, son. You did everything you could. I assured Nick. Gail started to come to, and one of the paramedics examined Nick. That's a nasty cut you have there, young man. I'm afraid you're going to need stitches. Nick cringed slightly as the paramedic gave him the good news. The kids left to get checked out at the hospital. I assured them I'd be there as soon as I was done talking to the police. At the hospital, the doctor said Gail was a wreck. Other than that, she had no serious injuries. Nick, on the other hand, had to get stitches in the cut. The doctor told them both to take it easy for a few days. The next day, I took them back to the house so they could each pack a bag, told them to pack enough stuff for at least a week. I had no idea what was going to happen to Linda, but I didn't care about that now. Back at my house, I told the kids to unpack and then we'd deal with the food. Takeout food seemed like the best option since I wasn't in the mood to cook. While the kids were putting their stuff away, I sat down with a cup of coffee, but my peace was broken by a knock on the door. I opened it and saw Judy. I'd come to visit my sister and noticed your car outside the house. Everything all right, Don? Not really, Judy. You'd better come in. I sat down and told her what had happened earlier. Oh my God. Are the kids all right? They're upstairs putting their stuff in their rooms. I said I'd call for takeout when they were done. No, Don. No takeout. You go and look after the kids and I'll start cooking. If I can't find something, I'll ask where it is or go borrow it from the nice lady next door. We both laughed at the joke. When the kids came downstairs, Gail immediately ran over to Judy for a hug. I could barely hold from crying when I realized that my daughter felt safer with someone she had only known for a few months rather than her own mother. Asterisk. Linda's parents bailed her out and foolishly took her back to the house instead of her own home. I learned that Linda was charged with assaulting children as well as a police officer. Apparently, when they took the handcuffs off her at the station, she broke free and hit the officer who was arresting her. When Linda left the house one morning, I went into the house and collected the rest of the children's belongings. I didn't file for custody. I just wasn't going to leave them with her anymore, and to hell with the law. Linda got 2 years probation for assault charges. She was ordered to get help for her drinking problem. Her parents finally woke up and realized how bad she was and took her in. Linda's father suggested that I sell the house since she was not going to be returning to it anytime soon. I thought about moving in with the kids, but they didn't want to move back into the house I thought was mine. I sold the house pretty quickly. When all the expenses were covered, I put the rest of the money in the bank. Legally, I owed Linda half, but she couldn't have it until she solved her drinking problem. For me and the kids, life went on. Oddly, they weren't bothered by Linda's absence. Gail had formed as strong a bond with Judy as I'd ever seen, and Nick had made new friends and looked happy for the first time in years. I didn't keep up with how Linda was doing. Her parents didn't see fit to keep me in the loop either. I didn't know it, but things were about to change. It all started when the kids went to bed, and Judy asked if we could talk. The dreaded "we need to talk" ran through my head. Sure, Judy. What's on your mind? I wanna talk about us. By us, I mean, me, you and the kids. I just stared at her and nodded. I know you've been having a hard time lately because of the divorce, because of being a part-time father to the kids. What I'm trying to say is that I really admire you for being such a strong man, and that admiration has turned into love. I love you, Don. I just need to know that you feel something for me. Wow, that stunned me for a few moments. I saw Judy looking at me waiting for an answer. Judy, I actually love you. I guess with everything that's been going on, I just haven't told you. You've helped me a lot these past few months, and I know that without you, I wouldn't have done as well as we've turned out. So, yes, I love you. And please don't think I'm just saying that. I'm sorry if I haven't shown you how much you mean to me because of everything else. I just haven't had time to say anything. Don, I knew you loved me. I just needed to hear you say it, you big fool. The fact that you didn't tell me you love me is one of the few things you've missed here lately. Did you know that Gail got her period? Oh my God. No. I didn't know. When did it start? She came to see me a few weeks before the Linda incident. Nowadays, girls know more than I did at her age, but she was still concerned. She even called me mom once, and I don't think she even realized she did it. Maybe it's because you've been more like a mom to her lately. Honestly, I didn't realize or notice anything different. It didn't surprise me that Gail had approached Judy about her period. It was unlikely that a girl would want to discuss it with her father. I sat down and smiled at Judy. She looked at me in confusion. Judy, I want to ask you something, and please be honest with me. If I asked you to marry me, would you want to have more children in the future? Judy sat up and smiled. If you ask me to marry you, I would answer yes. As for children, the answer is no. Now it's my turn. To be honest, I've known for years that I can't have children. I guess that explains why I'm still single. As soon as a guy finds out I can't have kids, he finds an excuse to dump me. I've grown to love your children as if they were my own. They're wonderful, and that's a credit to you. Judy joined me on the couch. We hugged and started kissing, and it wasn't long before we headed upstairs to bed. We both agreed not to say anything to the kids about our conversation. I told Judy I wanted to talk to them alone first. It was a little white lie. The next day, I left work early and paid a visit to a local jewelry store. After explaining to the saleswoman that I wanted a ring in roughly what size, I proceeded to make my selection. Not wanting to give up, I decided to drive home at the usual time, but due to traffic problems, I was 10 minutes later than usual. While I usually changed before dinner, I sat down to eat dinner in my suit. When we finished eating, I got up. Judy and the kids probably figured I was going to change. Judy was just about to get up and start clearing the table when I got down on one knee, holding the open ring box in front of me. "Judy, will you do me the honor of marrying me?" "Finally, thank God. I never thought you'd think of that, Dad," Nick said with a smile. Judy was still in shock. She looked at the ring and then at me. Yes. Yes. I will," she mumbled before crying. Judy stood up and hugged me. She huffed and wiped her eyes before kissing me. The tears started again as we were both hugged by Gail. "Does this mean I can call you Mom now?" Judy and Gail hugged. Nick shook my hand and gave me a manly hug. It was then that I realized that none of the kids had mentioned their mother or how she might react. I personally didn't care. In my eyes, it was none of her business. Epilogue: when the kids visited Linda, they informed her that I was getting married again. She just shrugged and changed the subject. Nick told me that Linda was getting help for her drinking. She looked much better than the last time they saw each other. By this time, I had applied for and received legal custody of the children. Linda was granted extensive visitation rights, but for some reason, known only to her, she saw the children once a month at best. After making sure Linda wasn't drinking, I wrote her a check for her half of the sale of the house. She thanked me and said nothing more. Her father thanked me for giving her the money. He said they hoped she would use it to start a new life. Shortly after Judy and I were married, the kids went to visit Linda, but came back and said she wasn't there, and her parents had no idea where she was. Judy said that Linda was probably starting a new life, and would contact them when she was settled, but that never happened. One evening, Linda's father called and said he had some bad news. We sat around while he explained that Linda had left and was settling in with a guy she met at the rehab center. It turned out that this guy was a drug user. According to police, Linda and this guy, James, died of an overdose. He started using drugs again, and Linda got hooked on them too. Once Linda's funeral was over, the kids never mentioned her again, at least not in my presence. Gail treated Judy like her mother. Nick started calling her Mom since we got married. I watched Judy and the kids interact with each other and couldn't but think about how Linda had messed up her life and then messed it up completely by getting hooked on drugs and ending it.